Okay, so this tutorial is a Milky Way time-lapse tutorial and how to edit and put it together using Lightroom and Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Premiere. Um, this tutorial, it's a more advanced tutorial, and for the sake of time, I'm going to need to assume a few things about what you know, primarily around Lightroom and Premiere. Um, Basically, if this tutorial should make plenty of sense if if you've used Lightroom and Premiere before for Lightroom to edit photos um, and export from Lightroom. And then if you have just done basic editing in Premiere, then you should be good to go. So I figured I'd combine it with Milky Way time-lapse editing, in that a lot of people have been sort of interested in what my process is. And so I figured I'd go into that in depth and go through a shot that you may have seen before if you follow my work. So we'll basically start off if you have, well, basically we'll start with assuming that you have finished importing all of your photos, all of the photos that you took um, for your time-lapse shot. Um, if this is just the raw file out of the camera, and we're going to use different methods to sort of batch tweak all of the photos and make color adjustments, some different sharpness and contrast, and maybe a little bit of clarity, although I never like to push that very far. And basically, a time lapse is just a series of photos played back at 24 frames per second, or in this case 30 frames per second. And from frame to frame, just little by little stuff changes. The time that goes by, though, from frame to frame is a lot greater than regular video in a time lapse, which makes for a more appealing um, you know, motion, and sort of brings alive various elements of a landscape scene, or um, also, time lapses of people. It brings a bunch of a bunch of things you don't notice over the course of like the normal passage of time. But when things are sped up, you get to see kind of how the world is working, which is what I find fascinating with a lot of the time lapse stuff that I do. Okay, so I'm going to just jump right into it. This tutorial does assume that you know how to shoot a single exposure of the Milky Way, that you've kind of figured out some of your settings and can kind of reliably set those up, and then set up your camera in either interval shooting mode, or if it has a time-lapse shooting mode like the Sony cameras, that you're able to shoot sort of a basic time lapse and apply the settings that you would normally for a single exposure, apply those to what the camera is going to do when it shoots the time lapse. This particular time lapse is a not a super long one. It's 379 frames, and uh, yeah. So my settings that I shot with, I used my Sony A7R II and a 25 millimeter lens. I shot this thing at ISO 10,000 and at f2.8. Each exposure was about 15 seconds long, just to give you sort of a frame of reference for how I exposed for this Milky Way shot. If I had it to do over again, I think I probably would have gone for a 20-second exposure, and I would have shot something more like 900 frames, starting a little bit earlier in the evening. But, you know, time travel doesn't exist yet, and so we'll have to make do with about 380 frames. Okay, so I'll go into the develop module, and basically how I think about this whole thing is I'm going to make changes that can be reliably synced or batch processed across all the photos. And so because this is going to be motion, there's a few things that I can't do. Like I can't use a spot tool to kind of clean up different parts of a photo, because over time those things are going to be moving, those elements are going to be moving, and so there are very few instances where I would use a spot tool to make per frame adjustments. In fact, I'd probably almost never do that. If I did need to do some sort of intense motion editing, then I'd use something more like After Effects, and that is an entire tutorial series on its own for that kind of per frame cleanup. So what I'm going to do is just sort of I'm going to try to get as much out of each frame as I possibly can, and then I'll export. I'll show you how to batch sync all of the settings, all of the exposure settings across all of the photos, how I export, and then how I bring it into Premiere, into a Premiere project. Currently, I shoot for a 4K resolution for my time lapses. At some point, I'll push it to 5.2K in the future, and then probably 8K, whatever, like 5 years down the line, whatever. You got to keep up with the professional resolutions as they occur. Okay, so we're in the develop module, and I am going to just sort of tweak this overall photo. Let's see, I'm going to kind of clean up some of this noise. I usually like to have a little bit of vibrance, not too much though. And bring down the highlights, bring up the whites. Should a little bit colder. Or bring down the black level somewhat. And I want to kind of bring out some of the detail down here, but this isn't the way to do it. So we'll get to that later. So what I aim to do is basically any kind of adjustment that adjusts the entire frame and doesn't depend on motion, or is unaffected by motion. and won't make things stand out. So I kind of want to sharpen up the stars a bit. So that's already set to sharp, maybe too sharp. Bring out the white some more, take down black a bit. I'm using a graduated filter here to okay. Not much we can do about the lower silhouettes there. So just sort of sharpening and that never seems to do anything. Okay. Wondering if we've gone a little bit too far with noise reduction. The overall sharpening that down. So when I want to edit a radial filter, any kind of filter, you just click it, and then they always have these little bubbles that you can click, and you can edit them. So I am pushing, right now I'm pushing the blues a little bit more towards the warmer end, further tweaking the overall white balance in this thing. And see what happens when we add a bit of clarity. Yeah, loving it. I think we'll do that with a new radio filter. Less, not radial, gradient filter. Okay, let's tweak that clarity. tweaking the noise reduction further because it's getting just a little gross. And I try to pump the clarity up a bit. Yeah, I can't go very far with that. This one. Okay, so we have tweaked that first photo about as far as it can go, I think. We don't want clarity to affect higher contrast edges. Sort of the mark of time-lapse video that is a little bit less professional looking. So I try to stay away from that. And I'm going to try out using this spot brush, but I'm going to be using it as a very sort of uniform application of it. Nah, actually not. Okay, so this is with our changes, and this is like basically before the changes. So the next thing to do is to basically take the things that we've done to this single photo and apply it all the way across all of the photos of the time lapse. And so this is going to look pretty cool, I think. Ends with a bunch of like clouds starting to obscure the frame. So I'm gonna left click that and then shift click to the last frame, the last photo of the time lapse, and then hit sync. And I just hit check all, make sure that everything is checked, synchronize it across all of the frames, and it will paste those settings on onto every frame uniformly. And then what I do is I just sort of go through the middle, just randomly kind of picking at different photos to see if the batch change to all of these is workable, that I like it. And it's looking pretty good. So yeah, I think that that's going to come out pretty nice. All right, so got it on the first try there. That's never happens. Anyway, the next step is basically to export all of these frames of the video, and we want to export them in a way that is going to do a 4K export, and we're just going to put it in the subfolder here. I'm just going to put it into a specific place. I can get at it. Milky Way time-lapse tutorial. And I'm going to export the frames to that folder. And to there we go. Okay, so we're going to do full 4K export. And that's all we need. I think I'll just do sRGB. And okay, so gonna hit export, and then I'll pause the recording, and I'll come back when the export is complete, and we'll move on to Premiere. Okay, and it is exported. So it took like 20 minutes or so. Let's head over to Premiere, and I've been watching the folder as the images sort of fill in. So in Premiere, once it's open, go to File, Import. Okay. 4K. And when you select the first frame, it should automatically check image sequence because all the numbers should be sequential. From your time-lapse shoot, hit open. And it'll import it into your project. And then drag it into your timeline. And hit play. I'm gonna render this real quick so that it plays smoothly. Be right back. Okay, so that's rendered. So let's hit play, see what it looks like. Looking pretty good. I would go back and sort of adjust the darks of this image a bit. For the sake of the tutorial, I don't really need to do that, but I think that I would check some of these frames through here. Where's a good spot? In like this area. And I think that I would bring up the darks a bit. Probably just something like that. Instead of the darker dark that we're getting here. But for the sake of the tutorial, we have the frames in there. It's playing smoothly, so I'll proceed. There's only a few more things to really do in Premiere. Of course, depending on your edit, depending on whatever film you're working on, there'll be different, different requirements of your project. But I want to show you just a couple things that I do that kind of just sort of up the interest a little bit in images like this. So one thing that I'll do is I'll create like either a slight amount of pan or a slight zoom to an image. I don't want it to ever be like too crazy, or else it's annoying and obvious, and you don't really want that. But in order to do that, basically in the effects controls, select your video, and then hit this little stopwatch icon to toggle animation on. And I'm going to basically create a very slight zoom in for this time lapse. Don't want to make it anything crazy, but so the way that this works is the frame that this is on, when you hit the stopwatch, it automatically creates the first keyframe. You can see it there slightly. It automatically creates the first keyframe, so make sure that you're at frame 0 or whatever frame that you definitely want motion to start or stop on. In this case, I want motion to start at 100%, and then by the end, I'm using the left and right arrow keys here to frame by frame. On the last frame, I want it to basically only have zoomed into like 103%. I want it to be very, very slight. Let's see what that's like. Yeah, it's not quite there enough. I'm going to do 110. That's too much, I think. 105. And then just sort of scrubbing back and forth to see the gist of the zoom. One thing that I also like to do, it's a very subtle thing, but it makes the zoom feel less like exact zoomy, is I pick something like the horizon line and kind of just eyeball some vertical motion on it to basically keep that steady. So I'm going to animate position at frame 0. I'll have its default value. And then on the last frame, I'm going to basically I'm counter animating it up throughout the course of it, so that as it's zooming in, it's a little too high. As it's zooming in, it feels more like actual camera movement. Of course, it isn't. You're never gonna truly simulate camera movement because there's none of that sort of micro parallax that happens in when a lens actually moves through space. But you get just a little bit of a sense of that in this, and sometimes that can be enough. I'm going to go ahead and render this again. After this is done rendering, I'm going to go over a couple of the common sort of export settings. A lot of people that are new to this don't know exactly right off the bat how they want to how to export files for different uses. For selling your time lapses and stuff like that, you want a very high quality. You want very, very, very high quality, probably 100 megabit .mp4 file at least, and then for Instagram, it's totally different what you actually need to export as to get the highest quality visuals on that platform. So let me go over that real quick. First thing first, go to, also you can add music. A little bit of music goes a long way for a time lapse. Let me see if I have something on hand here. This. So, uh, I recommend having a musician as a friend. Patrick Bryan playing he's just sort of playing around on his guitar here, and so sounds pretty good. Let me see about adding a little bit of reverb to that though. Cool. Mm. Okay, one thing I like to do, sorry, I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but each of these things is kind of fun to learn. Um, for Instagram and other social networks like Twitter, um, or even Facebook, videos will loop automatically, and changes might happen in the future to that. But kind of a fun little trick is to rewind the video for the viewer, so that it feels like they can watch it forever. Um, it's just a little bit of an extra thing that you can do um, for them. So I'm going to take this, nest it so that the video and audio is inside of that nested sequence, and then drag another one of it onto it. Set the speed to 1000 and reverse it. And make sure to set maintain audio pitch. Okay, let's render that real quick before we get to the exporting. Of course, all of this stuff needs to be more finessed. And in order to do that, you get more into animating your time remapping and things like that. So you ramp the velocity of speed changes um, in your footage over time. So over time, something accelerates its frame rate and then decelerates its frame rate, stuff like that. But we're not going to get into that for this one. Cool. So let's export it. I'll export. And first things first, put it in your the folder that you want. I'm going to actually put this in the tutorial. Save it. So so I'm going to go through these settings here real quick. The name of it, Milky Way tutorial video 4K. Save. So make sure that this is the correct resolution. And then we're going to set this to, well, for the sake of playback, I'm going to just set it to 40. That's usually good enough to upload to like YouTube or Vimeo. If you're exporting it for a professional setting, you'd want it to be more like 100 megabit bit rate. Also, you'd want to do 2-pass and render at maximum depth. For the audio, since there is music, set it to 48. And bitrate's fine. And then I'm going to go over the settings for YouTube next, so stay tuned. I'm going to export this real quick and pause the demo so we don't waste time. Export. Be right back. Okay. Just sort of reviewing. Cool. So that's the 4K export, and now let's do just a version of it for Instagram real quick, so you can see the sort of optimal settings for an Instagram video. If you've noticed, if you've ever tried to post a time lapse to Instagram or a video to Instagram directly from your phone, or that was like shot in 4K or in some kind of high quality settings, or if you've tried to post a high quality video to Instagram and then you've seen it just kind of get destroyed with the compression, it's like blurry, pixelated. You know, there's Instagram basically has a set of rules for content for both still images and videos, and if you sort of follow those rules in your own compression and your own exporting, then Instagram will touch your file less with its compression algorithm, and it will give you a higher quality end result once you actually post it to Instagram. So call this the Insta version of it. Save. And so what we're going to do, we'll go to the audio tab and we'll go to 44.1, and we'll set the bit rate for the audio to 128. Barely can notice a difference anyway, unless you're a sound designer or something. And then the main thing is that set your target bit rate minimum to Well, this is a pretty short video, so we'll set minimum and maximum to 15 megabits, and then have it render at maximum depth, which is the maximum bit depth available, so it doesn't compress that at all. And then 2 pass, maximum render quality, says it'll be about 25 megabytes, which is within good enough. Oh, and then, sorry, the one last thing is to change the width of the video to 640 pixels, and make sure that this is clicked so that you get an automatic height from that. That way, so this is the other big thing, is that when Instagram compresses the size of the actual dimensions of a video, for some reason it does a pretty poor job, and they have not improved that for years now. So I do that for Instagram. And this will give us our sort of best result for an Instagram post. And this will be the video that I post tomorrow-ish. Maybe it will be. Anyway, these are the settings, and then hit export. And I'm going to pause the recording here for a second. So just reviewing this, the Instagram version. Cool. So we have both those versions exported now. And that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you got a lot out of it, and if you have any questions or anything that you need, if you need me to cover anything in particular, feel free to reach out, and I can either help you directly or record a tutorial based around your needs, depending on if it seems like more people are also wanting to know how to do something. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for buying this tutorial and supporting the work that I do by doing that. And I hope that this helped you with your own work, and I'll see you out there shooting. All right. Take it easy.